take a deep breath. Let yourself settle into this moment, wherever you are. How was your day? Whatever emotions you're bringing in tonight, curiosity, stress, fatigue, wonder, uncertainty, it's all okay. This is your space to rest, to let go of the weight of the world, if only for a while. You don't need to do anything right now except be here. Let your body sink into comfort, your mind drift toward quietness. Tonight, we're travelling back through time to a story that has puzzled and fascinated people for more than 60 years. A story of two ordinary people whose lives were forever changed by one extraordinary night. The tale we're about to explore together is gentle and strange, filled with mystery but not fear. It's a story of love, of courage, of two people trying to make sense of something beyond their understanding. As we journey through their experience, let it wash over you like a dream, soft and distant, carrying you toward peaceful sleep. So breathe deeply, release the day behind you, and let yourself drift into this quiet corner of history where reality and mystery intertwine like starlight through the New Hampshire mountains. Part 1. The Ordinary Lives. In 1961, Portsmouth, New Hampshire was a quiet coastal city where neighbours knew each other's names and front doors rarely needed locks. It was here that Betty and Barney Hill had built their life together, a life that seemed in almost every way perfectly ordinary. Betty was 42, a social worker for the state of New Hampshire, who spent her days helping children and families navigate life's challenges. She had graduated from the University of New Hampshire and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who genuinely cared about making the world a little better, one case at a time. Her colleagues respected her thoroughness, her compassion, and her ability to remain calm under pressure. Barney was 39, a postal worker who made the 60-mile commute to Boston each night for his shift at the main post office. He was a World War II veteran with an IQ of 140 and a voice that commanded attention when he spoke. Despite the long hours and the challenging commute that often left him exhausted, Barney took pride in his work and his reliability. But what made the Hills unusual in 1961 wasn't their jobs or their personalities. It was their marriage itself. Betty was white, Barney was black, and their union represented something still rare and often controversial in America. Interracial marriages had only become legal in all states a few years earlier, and the couple faced the daily reality of being pioneers in a society still grappling with change. Yet they had found in Portsmouth a community that largely accepted them. They were active members of their local Unitarian Universalist church, where questions were welcomed and diversity was celebrated. Both Betty and Barney served on the board of their local NAACP chapter, and Barney had been appointed to serve on a local board of the United States Commission on Civil Rights. They were, by all accounts, respected community leaders who believed deeply in justice and equality. Their friends and neighbours saw them as a devoted couple who had found in each other not just love, but partnership in their shared values. Betty was known for her voracious reading habit. She could often be found at the local library, checking out books on everything from child psychology to astronomy. Barney was appreciated for his steady presence and his thoughtful contributions to community discussions. In the autumn of 1961, after 3 years of marriage, they decided to take a belated honeymoon trip. They had planned a romantic getaway to Niagara Falls and Montreal, a chance to explore new places together and create memories away from the demands of their busy lives. The trip was everything they had hoped for. They marvelled at the thundering falls, strolled through Montreal's cobblestone streets, and felt the simple joy of being tourists together. Neither Betty nor Barney had any particular interest in or belief in UFOs or extraterrestrial life. Betty enjoyed science fiction as entertainment, but both were firmly grounded in the practical realities of their daily lives. Barney, with his military background and analytical mind, was particularly skeptical of anything that couldn't be explained through logic and evidence. As they prepared to leave Montreal on the evening of September 19th, 1961, they were simply a middle-aged couple in love, tired from their vacation but happy to have had this time together. The drive back to Portsmouth would take them through some of the most beautiful countryside in New England, the White Mountains of New Hampshire, where autumn was just beginning to paint the landscape in brilliant reds and golds. They had no way of knowing that this ordinary drive home would transform them from private citizens into the subjects of one of the most famous and scrutinized stories in modern American history. They couldn't have imagined that their names would become synonymous with a phenomenon that would capture the world's imagination and forever change how people thought about the possibility of life beyond Earth. As their 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air pulled out of Montreal that evening, Betty and Barney Hill were simply two people in love, heading home through the mountains, looking forward to returning to their quiet, productive lives in Portsmouth. The stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky above them. Part 2. The Drive Through Darkness. The late evening air was crisp and clear as Betty and Barney Hill began their journey home through the White Mountains. It was approximately 10:30 p.m. on September the 19th, 1961, and they were making good time on Route 3, the winding highway that cuts through some of New Hampshire's most remote and beautiful terrain. Betty had taken the passenger seat and was gazing up through the windshield at the night sky. The moon was bright, hanging like a silver coin against the dark canvas of space, and she could see Jupiter clearly positioned nearby. The mountains rose around them in soft, dark silhouettes, and the road stretched ahead empty and peaceful. Just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty noticed something that made her lean forward in her seat. There was a bright point of light in the sky that seemed different from the stars, brighter, and moving in a way that didn't seem quite right. At first she thought it might be an aircraft, perhaps a military plane on some late-night training mission. "Barney," she said softly, not wanting to alarm him while he was driving. "Do you see that light up there?" Barney glanced up briefly but was focused on navigating the winding mountain road. "Probably just a plane," he replied, though something in Betty's tone made him take a second, longer look. The light appeared to be moving from below the moon upward, crossing the sky in a deliberate pattern. Betty reached for the binoculars they kept in the car for sightseeing and adjusted them carefully. What she saw through the lenses made her breath catch in her throat. "It's not a plane," she whispered. Through the binoculars she could see what appeared to be a disc-shaped object, with a double row of windows around its circumference. Multicoloured lights, red, green and white, flashed in patterns along its edge. As she watched, transfixed, the object seemed to be pacing their car, maintaining the same relative position as they continued down the highway. Barney's initial skepticism began to give way to unease. The light was behaving unlike any aircraft he had ever seen. It would stop, hover motionless for several minutes, then suddenly dart to a new position with impossible speed and silence. No conventional aircraft of 1961 could move like that. They decided to stop at a roadside picnic area to get a better look. Barney pulled over and they both stepped out into the cool mountain air. The silence was complete except for the distant sound of the wind through the pine trees. Above them, the object hung motionless in the star-filled sky. Taking turns with the binoculars, they both observed the craft in detail. It was definitely not a conventional aircraft. Too large, too silent, moving in ways that defied known physics. Betty began to feel excited rather than frightened. If this was some kind of experimental military craft, it was fascinating to witness. Barney, however, was growing increasingly uncomfortable. After several minutes of observation, they returned to their car and continued driving. But the object didn't disappear. Instead, it seemed to follow them, sometimes visible directly ahead, sometimes off to the side, maintaining its eerie surveillance of their journey through the mountains. As they passed through Franconia Notch, one of the most isolated stretches of their route, the object suddenly appeared much closer, close enough that Barney could see it clearly without binoculars. What he saw filled him with a terror he had never experienced before. Through what appeared to be windows in the craft, he could see figures, beings that looked humanoid but were somehow different, somehow not quite human. They were watching him, studying him, and he felt completely exposed and vulnerable under their gaze. "Stay right where you are and keep looking," he seemed to hear in his mind, though no words were spoken aloud. The message was clear and unmistakable, and it filled him with a panic he couldn't control. Barney ran back to the car, shouting to Betty to get in. His hands were shaking as he started the engine and pressed the accelerator to the floor. "They're going to capture us," he cried, his usual calm demeanour completely shattered. And then something strange happened to their perception of time and space. They heard a series of rhythmic beeping sounds coming from the trunk of their car, electronic tones that seemed to penetrate not just their ears but their entire consciousness. The sounds created a drowsy, hypnotic effect. The last thing either of them remembered clearly was the beeping growing louder and more insistent, and then nothing. A blank space in their memory, a gap in their experience that would haunt them for years to come. When awareness returned, they were still in their car, still driving south on Route 3, but something was wrong. The landscape looked different. The time felt wrong. They were now near Ashland, New Hampshire, dozens of miles south of where they last remembered being, with no memory of how they had gotten there. The beeping sounds returned briefly, then faded away. As their minds cleared, they both experienced the strange sensation of waking from a deep dream, though neither could remember what they had dreamed. They looked at each other with confusion and growing concern. "What time is it?" Betty asked, checking her watch. But their watches had stopped working. The car's clock had stopped too. Based on the position of the moon and stars, it appeared that several hours had passed, hours for which they had no memory, no explanation, no understanding of what had occurred. Part 3. The Return Home. Dawn was breaking over Portsmouth as Betty and Barney Hill finally turned into the driveway of their modest home. What should have been a 6-hour drive had somehow taken them nearly 11 hours, and they were both exhausted in a way that felt deeper than mere fatigue from a long journey. As they sat in their car for a moment before going inside, they began to notice things that didn't make sense. Barney looked down at his shoes and saw that the tops were severely scuffed and scratched, as if he'd been dragging his feet across the rough pavement. He had no memory of doing anything that would cause such damage. Betty discovered that her dress was torn in several places, with small rips that seemed precise and deliberate rather than accidental. The fabric was damaged in ways that couldn't be explained by normal wear during their vacation or the long drive home. Both of their watches had stopped, frozen at different times that didn't correspond to any moment they could remember. Even more puzzling, when they tried to start the watches again, they remained stubbornly motionless, as if some invisible force had permanently disabled their mechanisms. Inside the house, they unpacked their luggage in silence, each lost in their own confused thoughts. Betty kept returning to the image of the strange craft they had seen, while Barney couldn't shake the memory of the figures he had glimpsed through its windows. Both felt an odd compulsion to shower immediately, as if they were somehow dirty or contaminated. The next morning, October 20th, Betty decided to examine their car more carefully. What she found made the mystery even deeper. On the trunk of their Chevrolet, she discovered several shiny, concentric circles that definitely hadn't been there when they left for their vacation. The marks looked as if they had been made by some kind of magnetic force. Curious, Betty retrieved a compass from the house and held it near the strange markings. The needle began to spin wildly, whirling in rapid circles as if responding to a powerful magnetic field. When she moved the compass just a few inches away from the spots, the needle would suddenly drop down, pointing normally again. Neither Betty nor Barney could explain the missing time, the damage to their belongings, or the strange marks on their car. They were both intelligent, educated people who prided themselves on rational thinking, yet they were confronted with evidence that something inexplicable had occurred. Betty, with her naturally curious nature, decided to research what they had experienced. She spent hours at the Portsmouth Public Library, reading everything she could find about unidentified flying objects, and the civilian organisation called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP. What she learned both fascinated and concerned her. There were other reports of strange craft, other witnesses who had seen things that defied conventional explanation. But most importantly, she discovered that some witnesses had reported feeling sick or experiencing strange symptoms after their encounters. Worried about possible radiation exposure from their close encounter with the unknown craft, Betty contacted the local Air Force base at Pease to report what they had seen. She spoke with Major Paul W. Henderson, who listened politely to her account and filed an official report, though he offered no explanations for what they had experienced. "10 days after their encounter, Betty began having dreams, vivid, detailed nightmares that felt more real than any dream she had ever experienced. For 5 consecutive nights, the same terrifying scenario played out in her sleeping mind with an intensity and clarity that left her shaken each morning. In these dreams, she and Barney encountered a roadblock on the highway. Strange men surrounded their car and forced them out. She lost consciousness, but then found herself being led through a forest at night by small grey figures. She could see Barney walking behind her, but when she called to him, he seemed to be in a trance, unresponsive to her voice. The dreams continued with detailed sequences aboard some kind of craft, where she and Barney were separated and subjected to various examinations. The beings in her dreams had large, dark eyes and communicated without speaking, placing thoughts directly into her mind. After the 5th night, the dreams stopped as suddenly as they had begun, never to return. But their impact lingered. Betty found herself thinking about them constantly during the day, analysing every detail, wondering if they were simply the product of her stressed subconscious or something more. When she mentioned the dreams to Barney, he was sympathetic but not particularly concerned. He suggested they were her mind's way of processing the strange experience they had shared on the highway. The matter was dropped, and life gradually returned to something resembling normal. But normal was an illusion. Both Betty and Barney began experiencing symptoms that grew worse over the following months. Barney developed a painful ulcer and suffered from anxiety and insomnia. His blood pressure became dangerously high, and he complained of feeling constantly on edge. Betty struggled with persistent nightmares and anxiety that interfered with her work as a social worker. She found herself easily startled and had difficulty concentrating on tasks that had once come naturally to her. Most puzzling of all, Barney developed a ring of warts around his groin area, a perfect circle of growths that appeared for no apparent medical reason, and eventually required surgical removal. As 1961 turned into 1962, the Hills tried repeatedly to make sense of their experience. They took numerous trips back to Route 3, driving the same stretch of highway, hoping to trigger some memory of what had happened during those missing hours. But the landscape revealed no secrets, and their memories remained frustratingly blank. Finally, as conventional approaches failed to provide answers or relief, they decided to seek professional help. They needed someone who could help them understand what had happened to them during those lost hours in the White Mountains, someone who might be able to unlock the mystery that was slowly consuming their peace of mind. Part 4. The Journey Inward. In early 1964, after months of searching for answers, Betty and Barney Hill found themselves sitting in the comfortable office of Dr. Benjamin Simon, a respected psychiatrist in Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. Simon specialized in therapeutic hypnosis and had gained recognition for his work treating World War II veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. The Hills had been referred to Dr. Simon by several sources, including their family physician who was concerned about their ongoing physical and psychological symptoms. Neither Betty nor Barney was entirely comfortable with the idea of hypnosis, but conventional therapy had failed to provide relief from their anxiety and recurring health problems. Dr. Simon was a methodical man who approached his patients' problems with scientific rigor. He had been practicing psychiatric medicine for over 20 years, and had developed a reputation for helping patients recover traumatic memories that had been suppressed by the mind's natural defense mechanisms. During their initial consultation, the Hills explained their experience on the mountain highway and the months of distress that had followed. Dr. Simon listened without judgment, making careful notes about their symptoms and the timeline of events. He was particularly intrigued by the consistency of their account and the physical evidence they described. Most significantly, Dr. Simon was struck by the Hills' obvious sincerity. These were not people seeking attention or trying to profit from a sensational story. They were respected members of their community who had come to him reluctantly, hoping to find relief from genuine suffering. On Saturday morning, December 14, 1963, Betty and Barney Hill arrived for their first formal hypnosis session. Dr. Simon had equipped his office with recording equipment to document whatever memories might emerge. He understood that if the Hills had indeed experienced something traumatic, the recovery of those memories might be disturbing for all involved. Dr. Simon's approach was carefully structured. He would work with Betty and Barney separately, ensuring that neither could influence the other's recollections. After each session, he instructed them not to discuss what they had remembered until all the hypnosis work was complete. This isolation would help maintain the integrity of their individual accounts. The early sessions focused on relaxation and building trust. Dr. Simon taught both patients how to enter deep hypnotic states safely, helping them understand that they would remain in control throughout the process. He assured them that he would not lead them toward any particular conclusions, but would simply help them access memories that might have been blocked by trauma. On February 22, 1964, Dr. Simon conducted the first session aimed at recovering the missing memories from that night in September 1961. He started with Barney, asking him to relax deeply and return in his mind to the moment when they had stopped to observe the strange light in the sky. What happened next was unlike anything Dr. Simon had experienced in his years of practice. As Barney began to relive the events of that night, he became increasingly agitated. His breathing became rapid and shallow, his body tensed, and when Dr. Simon asked him to describe what he was seeing, Barney broke down in hysterical sobbing. "Oh, those eyes!" Barney cried out, his voice filled with a terror that seemed to come from the deepest part of his being. "They're there in my brain." The fear in his voice was so genuine, so primal, that Dr. Simon was momentarily shaken. This was not the reaction of someone fabricating a story. This was a man reliving genuine trauma. Under hypnosis, Barney described seeing beings through the windows of the craft, humanoid figures with large dark eyes that seemed to look directly into his soul. He spoke of feeling completely helpless, unable to move or resist as these beings communicated with him telepathically, telling him to remain still and continue watching. As the sessions continued, a detailed account of the missing hours began to emerge. Barney described how the craft had descended and landed near their car, how beings had approached them and led them up a ramp into the ship. His recollections were filled with specific details about the interior of the craft, the appearance of the beings, and the procedures they performed. When it was Betty's turn for hypnosis, her account proved remarkably consistent with Barney's, despite the fact that they had been forbidden to discuss their recovered memories. Under hypnosis, Betty described being separated from Barney and taken to an examination room where she was subjected to various medical tests. Betty's recollections included details that were particularly compelling because of their specificity. She described how the beings took samples of her hair and skin, how they examined her with instruments that looked familiar but functioned in ways she didn't understand. Most memorable was her description of a needle being inserted into her navel, as part of what the beings explained was a pregnancy test. Perhaps the most intriguing element of Betty's hypnotic testimony involved her communication with what appeared to be the leader of the beings. In her recovered memories, she had asked where they came from, and in response she was shown a three-dimensional star map, a holographic display of stars connected by lines, representing trade routes or travel paths. The leader had asked Betty if she knew where Earth was located on the map. When she said no, he had replied that it would be meaningless to tell her where they were from since she didn't understand astronomy. But Betty studied the map carefully, memorizing its pattern, and under hypnosis she was able to draw what she had seen. As the weeks of sessions continued, both Betty and Barney filled in more details of their experience. They described being returned to their car with their memories erased, awakening to find themselves driving south on Route 3 with no recollection of the previous hours. Dr. Simon completed his work with the Hills in June 1964, after 6 months of intensive therapy. The recordings of their sessions filled hours of audio tape, creating one of the most detailed accounts of alleged alien contact ever documented. But Dr. Simon himself remained skeptical of the literal truth of their recovered memories. In his professional opinion, the Hills had experienced a shared psychological phenomenon, perhaps triggered by the stress of being an interracial couple in a hostile environment, combined with the fatigue and anxiety of their long drive through the isolated mountains. However, Dr. Simon never doubted the Hills' sincerity. As he would later state publicly, "I believe implicitly in the honesty of these people. They genuinely believed they had experienced everything they described under hypnosis, and their consistent, detailed accounts suggested that something significant had indeed occurred that night in the White Mountains." Part 5. The World Takes Notice. For 2 years after completing their sessions with Dr. Simon, Betty and Barney Hill attempted to return to their quiet lives in Portsmouth. They had found some peace in finally having memories to explain their missing time, even if those memories raised more questions than they answered. They shared their experience only with close friends, family members, and the occasional UFO researcher who approached them respectfully. The Hills had no intention of seeking publicity for their story. Barney in particular was concerned about how public attention might affect his work with civil rights organizations and his standing in the community. Both valued their privacy and hoped that having recovered their memories would allow them to move forward with their lives. In late 1963, they had agreed to speak about their experience to a small gathering at their Unitarian church, and later to a meeting of the two-state UFO study group in Quincy, Massachusetts. These presentations were made to audiences of perhaps 30 people, mostly local residents interested in unexplained phenomena. The Hills spoke honestly about what they remembered and what they had recovered through hypnosis, emphasizing that they weren't trying to convince anyone of anything. They were simply sharing their experience. Unfortunately for their desire for privacy, a reporter named John Luttrell from the Boston Herald-Traveler had obtained an audio recording of their presentation to the UFO study group. In addition, he had somehow acquired notes from confidential interviews the Hills had given to UFO investigators, as well as information about their hypnosis sessions with Dr. Simon. On October 25, 1965, Luttrell published a front-page story in the Boston Traveler with the sensational headline, "UFO Chiller, Did They Seize Couple?" The article provided detailed information about the Hills' alleged abduction, including specific elements that had emerged during their hypnosis sessions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On October 26th, United Press International picked up Luttrell's story, and within hours the Hills' account was being reported in newspapers around the world. Radio stations called requesting interviews. Television producers sought to book them for talk shows. Suddenly, the quiet couple from Portsmouth found themselves at the centre of an international media sensation. Luttrell from the Boston Herald-Traveler had obtained an audio recording of their presentation to the UFO study group. In addition, he had somehow acquired notes from confidential interviews the Hills had given to UFO investigators, as well as information about their hypnosis sessions with Dr. Simon. On October 25, 1965, Luttrell published a front-page story in the Boston Traveler with the sensational headline, "UFO Chiller, Did They Seize Couple?" The article provided detailed information about the Hills' alleged abduction, including specific elements that had emerged during their hypnosis sessions. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On October 26th, United Press International picked up Luttrell's story, and within hours the Hills' account was being reported in newspapers around the world. Radio stations called requesting interviews. Television producers sought to book them for talk shows. Suddenly, the quiet couple from Portsmouth found themselves at the centre of an international media sensation. The timing of the story's release coincided with a period of intense public interest in UFOs and space exploration. The space race between the United States and Soviet Union was at its peak, and people were increasingly aware of the possibility of life beyond Earth. The Hills' story provided something that had been missing from most UFO reports: detailed, consistent testimony about direct contact with extraterrestrial beings. Betty and Barney found themselves thrust into a spotlight they had never wanted. Reporters camped outside their home. Strangers called at all hours, some seeking information, others offering theories about what had happened to them. The pressure was intense and relentless. Eventually they were approached by John G. Fuller, a respected journalist and author who had covered aviation and space topics for Look magazine. Fuller was different from the sensationalistic reporters who had been hounding them. He approached the Hills with respect and professionalism, seeking to tell their story accurately and completely. After months of careful consideration, Betty and Barney agreed to cooperate with Fuller on a book about their experience. They felt that if their story was going to be public anyway, they wanted it told correctly, with attention to detail and respect for the facts as they understood them. Fuller spent considerable time with the Hills, conducting extensive interviews and gaining access to the recordings of their hypnosis sessions with Dr. Simon. He also interviewed Dr. Simon himself, UFO investigators who had worked with the couple, and other experts who could provide context for their experience. The Interrupted Journey, 2 Lost Hours Aboard a Flying Saucer, was published in 1966 and became an immediate bestseller. The book presented the Hills' account in a straightforward, journalistic style, neither advocating for nor against the reality of their experience, but simply documenting what they claimed had happened and how it had affected their lives. The book's success brought even more attention to the Hills. They appeared on television talk shows, spoke at conferences, and were interviewed by researchers from around the world. Betty, in particular, found herself becoming a reluctant spokesperson for the phenomenon of alien abduction, a role she had never sought but gradually came to accept. One of the most intriguing aspects of the Hills story that captured public imagination was Betty's star map. The drawing she'd made after her hypnosis sessions showed a pattern of stars connected by lines, which she claimed represented trade or exploration routes between solar systems, as shown to her by the beings aboard the craft. In 1968, an amateur astronomer named Marjorie Fish became fascinated with Betty's star map and began attempting to match it to real star patterns. Using a three-dimensional model of nearby star systems, Fish spent years analysing the possibilities. Eventually she concluded that the map corresponded to stars in the vicinity of Zeta Reticuli, a binary star system located about 39 light-years from Earth. Fish's analysis suggested that Betty's map was remarkably accurate for information that wasn't available to the public in 1961. The positions of many of the stars shown in the map had only been determined by astronomers in the years following the Hills' alleged encounter. This discovery added another layer of mystery to their already puzzling account. As their story gained international recognition, the Hills found that their experience had profound implications beyond their personal ordeal. Their account introduced themes and details that would become standard elements in thousands of subsequent UFO reports. The missing time phenomenon, medical examinations aboard alien craft, beings with large dark eyes, and the systematic study of human beings by extraterrestrial visitors. The Hills story also represented something significant in American social history. Here was an interracial couple whose account of extraterrestrial contact was being taken seriously by mainstream media and the public. Some observers noted that their experience reflected broader themes of feeling alien or displaced in American society, particularly relevant to their status as an interracial couple in the 1960s. Tragically, the stress of their ordeal and the years of public attention took a toll on both Betty and Barney. Barney's health problems, which had begun after their original experience, continued to worsen. On February 25, 1969, just as their story was being adapted for a television movie, Barney suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died at age 46. Betty was devastated by the loss of her husband and partner. She had hoped that sharing their story would help them find peace and perhaps assist other people who had similar experiences. Instead, she found herself alone, forever identified with one of the most famous UFO cases in history. Part 6. Legacy and Questions. After Barney's death in 1969, Betty Hill continued to be a prominent figure in UFO research for the remaining 35 years of her life. She became something she had never intended to be, the most famous alleged alien abductee in the world, and a spokesperson for thousands of people who claimed similar experiences. In the years following Barney's death, Betty reported numerous additional UFO sightings and claimed to have been contacted by extraterrestrial beings multiple times. Some researchers suggested that her continued experiences were the result of the trauma and attention surrounding her original encounter, while others maintained that her initial contact had made her an ongoing subject of alien interest. In 1975, 6 years after Barney's death, their story was adapted into a television movie called The UFO Incident, starring James Earl Jones as Barney and Estelle Parsons as Betty. The film brought their account to an even wider audience, and solidified many of the visual elements that would become standard in depictions of alien encounters. The grey-skinned beings with large dark eyes, the sterile examination rooms aboard spacecraft, and the concept of systematic medical studies of human beings. What made the film particularly poignant was its focus not just on the alleged extraterrestrial encounter, but on the hills as human beings, their love for each other, their commitment to civil rights, and their struggle to be believed and understood. James Earl Jones brought particular depth to his portrayal of Barney, emphasizing the man's intelligence, dignity, and the genuine terror he experienced during the hypnosis sessions. As the decades passed, the Hill's account came under increasing scrutiny from skeptics and researchers alike. Some pointed out that many details of their story bore striking similarities to science fiction films and television shows that were popular at the time. Critics noted that Barney's description of the alien beings closely matched creatures featured in an episode of The Outer Limits that had aired shortly before his hypnosis sessions. Others suggested that the Hill's experience could be explained through known psychological phenomena. False memories created or enhanced through hypnosis, sleep deprivation, hallucinations during their long drive, or shared delusions triggered by the stress of being an interracial couple in a hostile social environment. Dr. Simon himself never believed that the Hills had literally been abducted by extraterrestrial beings. His professional conclusion was that Betty had experienced vivid dreams about alien contact, which she'd shared with Barney, and that under hypnosis Barney had unconsciously absorbed and integrated Betty's dream narrative with his own memories of their encounter with the strange light. However, Dr. Simon never questioned the Hills' sincerity, or suggested that they were deliberately fabricating their account. He maintained throughout his life that Betty and Barney genuinely believed they had experienced everything they described, and that their consistency under hypnosis indicated they were reporting what felt like real memories to them. Modern sleep researchers and psychologists have offered additional explanations for the Hills' experience. Some suggest that the couple may have experienced a phenomenon known as highway hypnosis, a trance-like state that can occur during long drives, particularly at night on monotonous stretches of road. This condition can create gaps in memory and distortions in the perception of time and distance. Others have pointed to the possibility of microsleep episodes, brief periods of sleep that can occur while a person is engaged in activities like driving, particularly when they are fatigued. Such episodes could explain the missing time and the confused memories of their journey through the White Mountains. Yet for every rational explanation offered, supporters of the Hills' account point to elements that remain difficult to explain through conventional means. The physical evidence they discovered, the scuffed shoes, torn dress, stopped watches, and magnetic circles on their car, has never been adequately explained by skeptics. Most compelling to many researchers is the consistency and detail of the Hills' account, particularly the elements that emerged during hypnosis. Both Betty and Barney provided extensive descriptions of the interior of the alleged spacecraft, the appearance and behaviour of the beings, and the procedures they claimed were performed on them. Their accounts matched in remarkable detail, despite being recovered separately under controlled conditions. The star map that Betty drew has remained one of the most intriguing aspects of their case. While skeptics argue that any random pattern of dots could be matched to some stellar configuration, supporters note that Betty's map showed stars in positions that weren't known to astronomers until years after her alleged encounter. In 2004, Betty Hill passed away at age 85, taking with her any final secrets about what had really happened on that September night in 1961. She had never wavered in her conviction that she and Barney had been taken aboard an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and she spent the final decades of her life corresponding with other people who reported similar experiences. Today, more than 60 years after the Hills' encounter, their story continues to fascinate and puzzle researchers, skeptics, and the general public. In 2011, the state of New Hampshire installed an official historical marker along Route 3 near the site of their alleged encounter, the first government recognition of a UFO incident in American history. The marker reads, "On the night of September 19th to 20th, 1961, Portsmouth residents Barney and Betty Hill experienced a close encounter with an unidentified flying object and 2 hours of lost time while driving south on Route 3 near Lincoln. They filed an official Air Force Project Blue Book report of a brightly lit cigar-shaped craft the next day, but only later, through nightmares and hypnosis, did they recall being taken aboard a spacecraft and medically examined by extraterrestrial beings. The installation of this marker represented a remarkable shift in how society views unexplained phenomena. Rather than dismissing the Hills' account as fantasy or delusion, the state of New Hampshire chose to acknowledge it as a significant piece of cultural and historical documentation, regardless of its literal truth. Modern researchers continue to study the Hills case using new tools and perspectives. Advances in understanding of memory, trauma, and consciousness have provided fresh insights into how their experience might have occurred and what it might represent. Some focus on the psychological and social factors that may have contributed to their account, while others examine the physical evidence and astronomical elements that resist conventional explanation. What remains undeniable is the profound impact that Betty and Barney Hill's story has had on human culture and consciousness. Their account introduced the modern concept of alien abduction and provided a template that has influenced thousands of subsequent reports. Whether viewed as literal truth, psychological phenomenon, or cultural mythology, their experience represents a pivotal moment in how humanity thinks about its place in the universe. The Hills story also reflects broader themes about alienation, acceptance, and the search for belonging that resonated far beyond the UFO community. As an interracial couple in 1960s America, they understood what it meant to feel like outsiders in their own society. Their account of beings from another world studying humanity with scientific detachment perhaps reflected their own experience of being studied, judged, and misunderstood by the world around them. In recent years, scholars have increasingly examined the Hills case through the lens of social history, exploring how their experience intersected with the civil rights movement, the space race, and changing attitudes towards science and authority in American society. Their story emerged at a time when many Americans were beginning to question official explanations and seek alternative sources of truth and meaning. Whether Betty and Barney Hill encountered visitors from another world or experienced something else entirely that September night in 1961, their courage in sharing their story opened a door in human consciousness. They gave voice to experiences that many people had but few dared to discuss, and they did so with dignity and consistency despite years of scrutiny and skepticism. Today, as humanity searches for signs of extraterrestrial life through radio telescopes and space exploration, the Hills account remains a compelling reminder that the greatest mysteries may not lie in distant galaxies but in the spaces between what we know and what we experience, between what we can prove and what we remember, between the world as we understand it and the world as it might truly be. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you can appreciate the courage it took for two ordinary people to share an extraordinary story, knowing they would be forever changed by their honesty. In the quiet darkness, under the same stars that shone down on Betty and Barney Hill that night in the White Mountains, we're all travellers on a journey through mystery, seeking understanding, searching for truth, and hoping that somewhere in the vast cosmos, we are not alone. Rest now, knowing that some questions are more valuable than their answers, and that wonder is one of humanity's greatest gifts. Let the gentle mystery of their story carry you into peaceful dreams, where anything is possible and every star holds infinite possibilities.